Okay, I think I'm ready to explain my rating system. So the way this works is I measure I measure all of these things. So this is my recordings of like Kami combos and routes and things, and I've only started doing the math for all of them. I'll wrap this up. I'll continue going down the list tonight or tomorrow or something. But so the way this works is for my combo recordings and stuff, I record damage, corner carry of Kami. So this is the distance that your own character travels at post the combo, which means this is how far away you could be from the corner in order to get Meatless Oki. This is number of centimeters of, this is measured in centimeters on my screen of the super gauge that you generate from a combo. So on my screen, on my monitor at least, the super gauge is 7 centimeters long. So if you were to, multiply this by 1/7, that's how much super you're generating for the combo. And then this number, which I've adjusted a little bit from here and there, is the type of Oki that you get. So number 4 is normal meterless Oki. You're well within throw range and mid screen. Number 2 is you are not close enough to land like a normal strike, but or drive rush into throw, but you can drive rush into a button to greater or lesser extents. And this becomes irrelevant if you are within this distance from the corner, at which point you will get normal Oki. Number 1 is Oki that will always be dog shit in mid-screen. Some of these things I've recorded with Kami, like anytime you land an EXDP at the end of a combo, the Oki, no matter what your positioning, cannot get good Oki from that. So, then I record these brackets. In these brackets, this is how much drive gauge you generate and how much drive gauge you steal from the opponent. For most of these combos that are not punish counters, don't use a DI, and don't use a super, the amount you steal from the opponent is going to be 0. The plus is for meterless conversions. So this plus only matters if you are not already at full drive gauge and assuming that you have no lingering drive gauge penalty on you at the moment that you begin the combo. So, some of these things, so for instance, level 3, etc. The reason why this, for instance, level 1, why this I've recorded as 0.7 drive gauge bars stolen from the opponent instead of 0.5, because as we all know, level 1s take, level 1s steal half a bar of drive gauge. The reason why I put it at 0.7 is because most of these actions universally, so punish counter, a DI, or a super, anything that steals drive gauge from the opponent universally applies a slight meter penalty, as every action that takes drive gauge from you or the opponent applies a slight meter penalty. I believe this is the same penalty as if they blocked something. I have not actually tested that. I'll be able to eyeball it because I know the timing. Huh. Yeah, it's about the same timing. So that amount of time that they spend not regenerating their drive gauge is equivalent to them regenerating 20% of a drive gauge bar. So 0.2 drive gauge bars, assuming that they are in hit stun, because the amount of drive gauge that they regenerate is different depending on if they're in hit stun, if they're in neutral, and then what they're doing in neutral, if they're standing, walking backwards, walking forwards, or airborne. So this is assuming that the amount of drive gauge that they would have recovered if they were in hit stun from some other combo. So this is a value related to combos next when compared to other combos, okay? Realistically speaking, this actually steals slightly more drive gauge when used as the end of a combo. than 0.7 because it steals the 0.5, and then the delay before they start regenning meter is, you know, more significant than how long it would have taken them to start regenning drive gauge otherwise. But usually on like combos that steal some drive gauge, like a punish counter at the start or like a knockdown or something, usually they start, that penalty has already finished before the opponent gets up off the ground anyway. So usually they're not in a hit stun. I feel this is a 99% accurate way to measure this. So then the way I do the math is I equate value, I try to equate things to damage. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking, let's see, I'm taking raw damage, so damage of a combo, plus 50, so my rate of, so damage is equal to damage, just flat out 1-to-1 rate, then corner carry is measured at 50 per square. Now, on the grid stage, the corner to corner is 8 squares. So, 1 square is 1/8 of the total length of the stage, okay? I measure it at 50. I think this is the part that I'm like most could take it or leave it about because it's a pretty low evaluation at 50 per square, but this is not including Oki. Oki is a separate factor which is based on the specific situation that you yield. Now, I have measured my values to Cammy specifically, so Oki for another character would probably relatively equate to different values. So then there's Oki, and then there's Super Gain. Now, I rate Super. Currently, I rate Super, so 1 bar of Super is equal to 1,500 damage. I measure that at about, so any fraction of a bar of Super that you generate through a combo is that fraction of 1,500 damage considered to be added onto the combo, and that equates to the value. Okay? Oki, I measure at these rates. So, no Oki, 0. Oki where you can drive rush and then do a meaty, 150. Oki where you can do a meterless meaty but can't throw, 300. Normal Oki where you can throw, 500. Corner Oki, 1,200 minus the whatever value would have been gotten by multiplying 50 times the number of squares carried in corner carry. And then Oki near to the corner, I added this in post, 700. I think I've changed all of these values a bunch of times in this process to find values that I think make the most sense and like add up to things that I think are logical. This is for Cammy specifically, and I think this might actually be lowballing the value of corner Oki, but the reason why Cammy specifically, let me demonstrate. So, say you get a low forward in the corner, right? On a crouching opponent. There's 2 major things that you can do to get the corner. So you can do this, that, which puts them here, this distance from the corner, assuming that they were point blank, which they probably wouldn't be. So let's say that we are here, low forward. So we get to here, okay? We get our side switch, we get that damage and that whatever, that super gain from the combo. We get totally good, like, throw or strike Oki, and we get here. Versus, what if we did this? Four bars in a level 1. But we get plus 11 and we're all the way in the corner. We're not slightly outside of it, we're all the way in the corner. So this is not close to the corner Oki, this is pure striker throw corner Oki. And the reason why that matters so much more for Cammy and why it's so much more valuable to be here instead of here is because her forward throw is only a throw loop right all the way into the corner. Because she doesn't have enough frame advantage to dash for a throw, she has to walk forwards, and she only barely has enough time to walk up. If you are even slightly outside of the corner, you are not able to engage your throw loop yet. So that is why I rate this at this rate. But Oki is more variable because it is not a guaranteed value. Super gauge that you generate is technically theoretical, but at least you can choose where to spend your super later on. Oki is an immediate value that could or could not go. It could be very good for you or it could be very bad for you, especially in the corner. The risk of corner Oki goes up because if you do a meaty and you get perfect parried and punish counter back thrown, the risk is much greater in the corner than if you are in mid screen. However, the potential reward is also much greater, especially for Cammy. So, because of that, I rated it this, but with I could change this depending on whether or not I think Oki is more or less risky. But Oki isn't just an immediate mix; it's the potential for mix and the potential for extended pressure and such, which has other theoretical and specific values. So I think this is a good valuation. Okay, let's take for example Ken. Let's use Ken players and what the decision making they make as an example of this. Ken players will choose to do, okay, say they get a low forward drive rush in neutral. Ken players could do this. 2,360 damage, and they get totally modest, totally decent Oki. They can dash forwards, and they are plus 11. They can meaty, stand heavy punch, and they're not that far away from getting something else, okay? So they can do single hit confirmable actions from a strike meaty situation. Pretty decent Oki, alright? Decent Oki for mid-screen. But they don't do this. Ken players almost exclusively do this. 1895 damage, will round that up to 1900 damage. That is 450 less damage, more than 450 less damage than the other route. Let's alter our super so I can demonstrate that as well. The optimal damage route is that it builds 2.8 centimeters of super versus this, which builds 2.5 centimeters. Not a huge difference, but the other one does build more super. So 450 more damage, totally decent Oki, and more super gauge generated on the damage route, okay? But they choose to forgo over 500 damage worth of value just to do the extra carry and the better Oki. So that's why I think it is modest and reasonable to evaluate it at these values. And usually they're choosing to do this because it gets the corner, but not always, and maybe there's some faults to their logic, but that's what I'm using as a basis here. For the really, really heavy carry combos, the combos that carry you like 4.5, 5 or more squares across the screen, when you usually do that to subtract this, it's still like a pretty significant value. So, anyways, I measure supers at 1,500 value per bar of super. Now let me explain that. So, let's say you land a raw super, okay? This will be better to explain with Cammy because that's what I've been doing all of this with. You land a raw super. It does, level 1 does like 2,000 damage. Now usually you're confirming into this at a rate at a much reduced rate. So if you get like a low forward drive rush and you don't spend any more drive gauge after that, your normal damage route is just like that, 2,101 damage. Now this, and this is a shitty way to go into level 1, but this is your optimal level 1 off of this hit, assuming the opponent is crouching when you started, and with no extra. So you spend a super, you get an extra 380 damage. And more corner carry. So if the first combo would not hit the corner, but the adding the super onto it would, then, and relatively speaking to spending an extra bar of drive gauge, in this instance, I would not do this. I don't think it's worth it, because you could just spend an extra bar of drive gauge and do that, and you'd get even more damage and build more super, and you've only spent one drive gauge instead of a full super. So that's why I'm measuring all of these things, so that we can make logical determinations like that. But the point is that if you watch real matches, as I've been doing and measuring on super measurement. So I've been going through the Capcom Cup, I've been watching every match, seeing where supers were spent, and when rounds ended, and how much super that wasn't spent, i.e., how much, okay, for instance, any time that one of the players hits 3 bars in a match, as soon as they hit 3 bars, any strike that they do on hit, block, any interaction, no longer builds them super, because they can't build more than 3. Which means that every single match, as soon as they hit 3 bars, I go in and I replicate literally every single situation that happened for the rest of their matches, and I did this for all of those matches that I recorded in that spreadsheet. I measured for every single action that was taken after they got their level 3 to see how much super they were missing out on because they were already full. So, when I pull that up, right, problem, I got better at how I was measuring these things as I went on. So let's say like Punk, Cammy versus Yamaguchi DJ. Cammy, okay, he used level 1 extra damage in the corner, first round, already had a huge life lead, burnt the opponent out, would have been in throw kill range without super. So the super did not kill him, but it put him closer to kill, and it put him in... No, burnout means Punk was in burnout. That's how I measured it, or that's how I recorded it. So the way people in the real matches tend to use supers is they use supers near the end of a round. They use, like... Okay, the characters with good level 2s just spam the shit out of their level 2s. JP, Rashid, Blanca, etc. They just do a million fucking level 2s. But the characters that don't have just brain dead level 2s, they generally save all their meter until they get like level 3 or something, and otherwise, okay, so this is how Punk plays, right? He spends no super, and he holds on to level 3, and he only spends super if, like, he needs the super to kill off of the current combo he's gonna do to take a round, or if it's very close to killing, or if it, like, reduces the opponent's drive gauge. He already has a significant lead, and he reduces their drive gauge and does extra damage in this capacity. So, what this did for him is it put the opponent... It didn't kill the opponent, but they put the opponent at even lower than it would have been otherwise. He would have already had a huge advantage and probably won had he not spent the super, because he had a huge life lead, and he would have put him at 1 throw from kill without spending the super and just doing the non-super version of the combo that he confirmed the super into the super with. But he did this because it did extra damage, and which gave him a slight advantage, and it put Yamaguchi's drive gauge at 0.5 bars, whereas otherwise it would have been 0.7 higher than that, as we recorded, because level 1s take 0.7 away from the opponent. So he took away a full bar of... So he made it so that Yamaguchi did not have 1.2 bars coming out of this, which could have been used to safely do at least tap parry to attempt a perfect parry, which would have allowed him to get a punish counter back throw, which, since Punk was already in burnout, would have been a theoretically risky situation. So he did this to keep Yamaguchi at low drive gauge enough that he could not whiff a parry, okay? So it didn't burn him out and it didn't kill him, but the combination of being close to both of those actions was still relatively decent value. Potentially value. I think I'm actually thinking of a different round because I recorded this at low value. Anyway, so next, DJ Yamaguchi hits level 3, and then before he spends a level 1, before he spends his next super, he misses out on building 0.59 super gauge. from the subsequent interactions that occurred. He uses a level 1 in a corner combo. He already had a huge lead. He did like 300 extra damage for it. He didn't put Punk at a particularly low. He got no extra benefit. He got no personal benefit from it for his own drive gauge. He didn't put Punk in a specific like life deficit that was extra advantageous or drive gauge deficit that was extra advantageous. He just did it whatever, okay? Vit, so the way I record this, because this is important to how you spend super, because, like, in a round that you don't have to win, you can afford to not get value out of your supers, right? So on the first round where neither player's won, so I record these as first, so first round, Vit for vital round, that means that Punk won the first round, which means that Yamaguchi absolutely had to win the next round, otherwise he would lose, so there's no point in sitting on your super for another round. You have to use your super and get value out of it. Now, he could have tried to win without spending super and then had more super going into the final round, but, you know, depending on what type of round you're in, whether it's first round, you lost the first round, you won the first round, or you're in the final round, it changes how you think about the value that you need to get out of your supers and how to use them. So, then the next interaction, Punk got his level 3, and he did nothing with it for so long that he would have generated an extra 1.14 bars of super before his next interaction. He used level 3, he had a slight life lead, he had low drive gauge, he got a very strong drive gauge advantage relative to Yamaguchi. It was the final round, and he put him at throw-kill range, and then he shortly got the throw for the kill afterwards. So I record that at good value, etc. Next round... Oh, that same round, Yamaguchi got the level 3 and did nothing with it, and had it for so long that he would have built 0.93 supers from the subsequent interactions and then died with full super. So basically lost 3.93 supers. So that is basically how I went back through all these fucking matches, and I've still got more matches to go through and do this. But that is how I was measuring this, and there's no mathematical way to calculate the true value of some of these things. Like, there's no mathematical way to calculate the true value of, like, supers that give you some advantage, or, like, this round, or maybe save it for another round, or those sorts of things. But I can at least get a general idea of how much value they wound up getting, and how much super they wasted by winning with completely excess surplus super, or losing without spending their supers, or spending supers on losing rounds, etc., which is disastrous, etc. So, spending supers on losing rounds that they didn't have to win, I mean. And so, that's where I thought about this, and so I'm looking at, okay, there's ways to get massive value out of your supers if they're in situations where it kills, or it gets burnout, or something like that. So there's theoretically very massive gains to be had, but how does that counterbalance with the very massive losses, such as holding on to your level 3 for so long that you could have built a full extra bar, and you never use your super, and you just die with it? Okay? So how much is the actual comparison between, yeah, level 3 gives you a lot of shit, but also, that's a lot of fucking loss, okay? And Punk had even worse losses in his final match, in grand finals of the LCQ with Problem X. I didn't record it as well here, but like Punk, while he was playing Cammy at least. Okay, here. Both of these are all these things were when I was only recording for level 3. So Punk got level 3 and then held onto it so long that he could have built an extra 2 bars of super from all the subsequent interactions before he used his level 3, and when he eventually used it, he got negative value out of it. It was blocked on his wake-up super and punished. So he essentially wasted 5 bars, effectively 5 bars of super, got 0 value out of it. Same thing here. Lost, okay, so 1.33 and 1.14 is how much super he wasted sitting on his level 3, not building more super. So this waste of 5 bars, this waste of 4.14 bars, completely no value out of those that he got in the matches. So when you compare, okay, yeah, holding onto a super can give you theoretically really good value if you get the right situation, but you can fucking lose value on supers if you don't spend them. So I am trying to get an idea of, generally speaking, what is the actual value of a super? There's some situations where a super can be incredibly valuable, some situations, but like, what's the likelihood of those situations occurring? What will happen in most circumstances? Will you end up just sitting on a bunch of super you don't end up using? And I'm using that to compare to the value of just using supers in your combos for confirms for just basic things like adding damage, getting Oki, getting more corner carry, etc. And so that's where I'm measuring this, and I'm trying to figure out how much super is actually wasted, and to what degree is it better to just use your supers when you can land them. So that is part of it, but long story short, I am currently measuring super at 1,500 value per bar of super. Realistically speaking, it might be higher than that. This is for Cammy specifically. For characters with bullshit level 2s, this value would be significantly higher, okay? Rashid and Blanca consistently get insane value out of their level 2s and never waste any value because they're not sitting on their level 3s. So they're not losing super that they could have already been gaining. They use their level 2s, and then they just get incredible advantages from that. So, for Cammy, I am measuring this at 1,500 damage equivalent value per super. And then, so that's where I'm doing the Oki, and that's more or less how I'm measuring these things. For things that cost drive gauge and things that, okay, so for instance, if I were to pull up calculator, so if I were to measure the value of doing this meterless light confirm to spending it on drive gauge, which the optimal would be, that's a crouching one, and that's like incredibly difficult to do. What's the one that I'm looking for? Drive rush. Where am I looking for? Not level 2. Wait. Here. Back heavy kick. Back medium punch. Target combo. This is technically, according to my math, this is slightly more value, but it's like only like fractions, like a tiny little point percentage off from the other thing that's less execution, easier to do. But anyway, so let's take it off of the technically better one, according to my values. So let's compare the meterless light conversion with the drive rush cancel light conversion, assuming the character is crouching, and that regardless of what you do, you will not get the corner. So we come out, once we do the math, which I already did here, we come out to 3,870. Now, the reason why this says minus 1,200 is because it's evaluating the relative value of the drive gauge that you spent. So in a very blunt fashion, I value drive gauge, 1 bar of drive gauge at 400 for Cammy, and I value it at 300 for the opponent. The reason I am doing less value for the opponent is that the entire point of this is optimization, and so I need to assume that I/us, the player and person using this data, are more optimal and thus will eke out more value per drive gauge bar than our opponent does, if this is to work out. So our drive gauge is more valuable than our opponent's, because they'll just fuck it up. Fuckwads. So we come to 3,000. I have a calculator here. You can hear it right now, but I'll just do this on screen so that you can see. Minus 2283, which is the value up here for the meterless conversion. So that comes out to 804 value. So this is assuming that we start this combo. 1, nothing we can do can reach the corner. 2, or at least that we're choosing not to do a thing that can reach the corner or whatever. We're just comparing these two things. So 1, we're not near the corner. 2, we have full drive gauge, and the reason why it's important that we have full drive gauge is 1, because it changes the risk of spending drive gauge depending on how high or low you are. If we were at 4 bars and we spent 3 bars on this, the risk and thus the cost of spinning that drive gauge and putting yourself down to 1 bars is not worth it. And in fact, I have a way of calculating that because I have a multiplier here that is situational for how to multiply the value or make it into a fraction of itself based on how low you put yourself in your drive gauge. And that's also matchup dependent and situation dependent. So more abstract, but in a broad sense, assuming that we start these combos at full meter, this comes out to 3087 value using these mathematics and these values. This, because it's a meterless conversion, doesn't apply any drive gauge penalty. So if it wasn't already starting with full 6 bars, you would generate an extra 0.8 bars of drive gauge during this combo. So if we had started with 5 bars instead of 6 bars, there would be a 3.8 difference in the relative drive gauge between these two combos instead of just a 3 difference. So assuming that we're at full bars when we get this light confirm, this is the relative value. So if we divide that by 3, that is how much value we're getting per drive gauge bar spent. Is this worth it? I would like to shoot for getting 300 value per drive gauge, at least. I would like to shoot for getting 300 value, so this is a bit low on my end, as would be expected for a light confirm into drive rush. Okay? Now, if you have to, it's more worthwhile to spend drive gauge on anything, even things of relative low value per drive gauge bar, if you're already at full bar. But let's compare it to if you're not. So, 2283 plus 320, which is 400 per the drive gauge spent. So, 2603. So, 3087 minus 2603 is equal to that. So that's the difference divided by 3.8, which would be the difference in drive gauge. So that brings it all the way down to 127 value per drive gauge, relative drive gauge between these two combos if you are not already at full meter, which means it is very, very not worth it if we are trying to aim for 300 value per drive gauge. So that's how we would calculate relative value of how much, damage, Oki, corner carry, etc. value you're getting from drive gauge. Now this is augmented depending on whether or not the extra expenditure of drive gauge will give you the corner, whereas not spending it will not give you the corner, which you would have to do math specifically for those ranges. So, which I have not quite done yet for Cami. I will do that, and then that will be part of the topic of the Cami optimizations, but currently I'm just explaining my system for how I'm calculating these things and why I think it's logical. And I've been doing this for the last several days, and I've retooled how I do my math and stuff, so I'm pretty comfortable with where it's at right now. I've changed a lot, and I think that this makes sense the way I have it now. But it gets more complicated when you're spending both a super and drive gauge in a combo, because you can't measure one of them. You can't measure them both at the same time. So for instance, this is spending what, level 2 off of a light confirm. So this wait a minute, that's back. Okay, so this, this is the more realistic one because it doesn't require standing. But let's assume it's this, which is a standing only combo. So if you get 2 jabs and then recognize your opponent's standing, you can go for this. So the difference in value that we are looking at is effectively, if it reaches the corner, which it is prone to do because it has massive corner carry, we are looking at 410 value, and you would do this mainly in order to achieve the corner. So you can be 4.5 squares away in order to do this one. 4.25 for this one. So let's do the one with more corner carry because it's safer to do. Okay? So 4.5 squares away, that is, you can be before the midpoint of the screen and still get the corner with this. Still get perfect corner Oki with this. So this, including taking into account the amount of drive gauge we take from the opponent at 1.1, so 300 per drive gauge, assuming, and that value can only go up if the opponent is lower on drive gauge. This is assuming that both you and the opponent are maxed out on drive gauge. If your drive gauge is lower, the value gets worse. If the opponent's drive gauge is lower, the value of this gets better, etc., relatively speaking. But this is assuming you're both at full resources. It comes out to, if you get the corner with this, it's 4,726 value on the dollar. Compared to if you did not spend the drive gauge in the super and you just did this light confirm here. So that is minus 2283. So that is 2,443 value, relatively speaking, that we obtain by spending 3 drive gauge and a level 2. But how do we calculate how much the drive gauge is worth here or how much the super is worth here? So if we overly simplified, if we brutishly simplify to say drive gauge is worth 400, which is already a high estimate because we're usually not eking 400 damage out of all of our per drive gauge out of all of our confirms and such. Minus 400 times 3, so minus 800, that comes to 1,243 for in terms of just raw value that we're getting relative to the level 2. So divided by 2, 622 value is how much we're getting per bar of super if we do this and we get the corner for it, and the meterless conversion that we could have done would not have gotten the corner. So that's how we look at these things. 621 value per super. That's how I'm calculating things and working things out, and in the matches that happen, you know, people like to save their super for other things. They don't like to really spend their supers on things like this. I think these things are probably not worth doing unless you absolutely need to take the round, or you're very confident in your ability to take the round if you spend this. But, so in vital rounds or final rounds, I think you can lower your value per super to this and not do it when you have like when it's like kind of even and you're not sure if you're going to win the round, etc. You don't want to spend super and then have it be wasted on a losing round if you can avoid it. But I'm currently measuring things like this and fucking stuff. So that's how I'm looking at things. And so I'm going to go through these. I'm going to measure all the value per drive gauge and value per super of every fucking combo that you can do in this video game. It will, with this character. And figure things out. Figure out what makes sense. So that is how I'm currently measuring value. And that is how, using this system, is how I came to determine and realize that doing this, when you have full drive gauge, there might be a better thing to do, and that if I really look at all the ways that you obtain value from this, that doing this 4-bar and 1 super conversion might actually be better by a substantial margin. I wouldn't have thought of that. It wouldn't have occurred to my brain, but when I actually look at the math of the things that, of how much it increases in terms of your super generation, your damage and your position and such, the measurements clearly come out that has a substantial increase in value compared to the side switch combo that Camis just always do anyways, which is that. And in fact, most Cami players do a shittier version of it, which is this. That's what I'm doing. So, I'm recording and measuring these values to get a better, broader perspective on these combos and their relative values, to see and figure out what makes sense to do, what doesn't make sense to do, what is actually worthwhile that you wouldn't have expected, what is not worthwhile that you naturally and instinctively think is worthwhile, and where you end up losing value in your supers by playing the matches as you normally do, and getting your shit fucking wasted. that's about it. See ya.